Well, I wish I could be there in person, but I'm over here. And I just got an email about 35, 40 minutes ago that says somebody saw swans flying overhead in the Snohomish Valley. Likely they're tundra swans, if they were swans, probably they were. They migrate a bit earlier through here than the trumpeters do. But I'm going to focus my program tonight on the white birds of winter and spring, swans and snow geese, with an Eastern Washington focus. Primarily because you have something very different than we have over here in terms of trumpeter swans, and also in the tundra swan category. So I just want to give a shout out to Kyle Spraggins, WDFW's Wild Waterfowl Program Manager, who's pretty much a great partner with us in keeping track of waterfowl in general. I do sit on the department's Waterfowl Advisory Committee, which is mostly about waterfowl hunting, but it's got a big focus on if you want to hunt waterfowl, you have to grow them, which is wetland conservation. And that also includes all species of waterfowl, hunted or not hunted. So a great partnership with them. So swans in North America, who are they? We have three, the native trumpeter and the native tundra and the introduced mute swan, which I'm going to focus really on our state with the mute swan and just say that it is declared a deleterious species, meaning hazardous to our native wildlife. You may not possess, sell, trade, transport, import, breed, or otherwise deal with mute swans. So if you happen to know of any mute swans that are around in the state, they have an orange bill with a black knob on their base, please notify me and I will make sure the right people get the message. Meanwhile, we have two native swans, the trumpeter and tundra, both native to North America. Trumpeter being the largest waterfowl in the world, and the tundra swan a bit smaller. So here's an ID quiz for all of you to start with. And for those of you who aren't real familiar with it, are all these swans the same? So when you're out birding and it's the fall and you see these things flying around, so we have at the top are two trumpeter swans, and at the bottom we have three trumpeter swan juveniles, and then we have this little guy here in the middle, which is a tundra swan. And you can tell because it's smaller. It also has yellow on the lure. And there are other characteristics that you might be looking at, but in flight, it's just going to be a smaller bird. I don't expect you all to see yellow on the lure. The person that sent this photograph to me had no idea that he was taking a picture of, he thought he was taking a picture of a family of trumpeters, and it turned out not so much, which is kind of exciting. So swans that we have here in Washington State breed in Alaska. The tundra swans all breed in Alaska, and our trumpeter swans breed in the central core of Alaska. And some of our trumpeter swans also breed in the Yukon Territory to the east of Alaska and a little bit into western British Columbia. Your swans also breed in, but this is the Pacific Coast population. So when we look at this now, your tundra swans all breed in Alaska. Your trumpeter swans that you have over there, and we'll talk about the Rocky Mountain population, those birds all breed in Alberta or eastern British Columbia. Our western trumpeter swans are the Pacific Coast population. We'll talk about that. and they breed here in Alaska. But I included the slide just so you could get an idea of where the tundra swans come from, because you have a lot of them over where you are, and we're all about all species, and the tundra swans are really fascinating, especially on the way far east side of Washington, which is where you guys are. So in terms of the 2024 census, census of tundra swans, let me just say this is Alaska this last summer, what they have. And our tundra swans are breeding down here by Bristol Bay and Cold Bay a little bit right in here. And that's where they breed. All the rest of the tundra swans that you see in blue and red, all those birds go down to California, a little bit of Southern Oregon, but mostly into California and into Utah and east of us. So they go through Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and all of that because they're part of the Pacific Coast population, or the Pacific population of tundra swans. The trumpeter swan numbers are here, and they relate to just populations that are breeding in these areas of Alaska. At the top of the screen, you'll notice in purple, eastern tundra swans, 11,033. These birds all go to the East Coast, which I will show you in a moment. They do not come to the West Coast because there's this mountain range called the Brooks Range. And if you follow the Brooks Range down, it goes over here and goes down and becomes the Rocky Mountains. So this is actually the Atlantic Flyway versus the Pacific Flyway. So the 2024 Midwinter Swan Survey results in 6 counties in Western Washington, which is going to be our Pacific Coast population of trumpeters and tundra swans. I have to say that this last winter, take the counts with a grain of salt in terms of identification of swans. It was a disaster in terms of weather, getting people who actually knew what a trumpeter or a tundra looked like. So we have the count of swans and juveniles, just not the identification that we might be looking at. So in Whatcom, Skagit, Snohomish, and King, which is where we have the largest concentration of trumpeter swans in North America in the winter, we actually only had 10,619, and that is down from the previous years by 15 to 18%. So the juveniles were only 8.8%. So we're just really not seeing the swan numbers. We're down, like I said, 40, almost 5,000 swans fewer in these 4 counties than we've had in previous years. So what does that really mean? We're not sure, but it appears there's a trend going downward. The big white birds in Alaska, which are swans and snow geese, the swan populations are trending downward for both tundra and trumpeter swans. And the snow geese of Wrangel Island, of which all of our snow geese, east and west, come from Wrangel Island in Russia. It appears to be from rumors, because we can no longer go to Russia. We can no longer talk to Russia scientists because of the war in Ukraine. And that it was a poor breeding year up in Wrangel Island, and because of a late snowmelt. So that would just mean that they just didn't bring off what we had expected. But we'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to the snow goose part of my talk. So tundra swans. So as you can see, they have a wide variety of yellow on the lower. Some of them have a red line on the mandible, like the bird here on the far left. I'm just going to point that out because some people believe that tundra swans do not have red on the mandible, and that's not true. about 15 to 20% actually do. So the tundra swan range map, as you can see, the breeding is in this pinky red, and it shows the Alaska coastline, and then across the whole Arctic, around kind of the northern Great Lakes area. However, let's just be realistic. The only swans that we are concerned with here in Washington are really out here at the base of the Aleutian chain. All of the swans in the rest of North America that breed outside of Alaska are all eastern population of tundra swans. The yellow gives you some of the migration pattern, and the winter gives you some of the wintering patterns of our tundra swans. Noting that in the middle of the country, tundra swans really aren't there. They're coastal. They're either East Coast or West Coast. So here is some migration satellite transmitter data that shows from in the fall migration on the north slope of Alaska, all the birds go to the East Coast and a very specific area, typically Chesapeake Bay and those zones in there. And that, again, our birds kind of go these circuitous routes that are kind of interesting. So we're out here at the end of the Aleutians and kind of the middle, and that red comes down and goes right into Western Washington. So that's where our tundras come from. Then we have the base of, truly the base of the Aleutians, and kind of to think of the name of the refuge. It's not Salmon Bay, it's something else. Those swans, they come down, and you'll notice that they kind of make curves all the way to the east into Idaho, and then come back into Northern California. And some of them come straight down into British Columbia, Oregon, Western Oregon, and some into our area. So along the Columbia River, the fall migration is here. Now, coming back, it's kind of interesting to note that, you know, the East Coast comes along through its normal route. Our far out here Aleutian Island ones go over the Gulf of Alaska. But you look at the ones that are here in the Salmon Bay area, and they end up going east and then up and around. Now, this is Northern California. But some of them come here and then they go, if you'll notice, we'll look at this a little bit closer. There's a split that happens in our tundra swans, and they go back up here. So we'll talk about that in a moment. So this is a wild map of all kinds of geese and swans and things that are out there in the world. But again, you can see where different tundra swans are going in different species. This is all the satellite transmitter data, especially the North Slope, that shows you how odd some of these pathways are. So here in Washington, the migration in Washington,
Lost the audio.
We can't hear.
Martha, are you muted? Somehow we lost your voice.
I'm back. Am I there now?
We can hear you now.
Okay, I don't know what, oops, I don't know what happened. So where did you lose me? Tundra swans?
Yes.
Right at the
So-
beginning there.
the tundra swans were not a focus because most people were worried about trumpeters and the coming back. That was in the 70s. But in Washington State, way back in the 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, interestingly enough, there were always trumpeter swans out here on the outer coast. And there were a lot of tundra swans because, as you can see, this little sliver here, pink, salmon color, that's the Columbia River. And that's where a lot of swans used to hang out. Some still do. But the tundra swan migration, as you saw in the satellite, comes down the west side. And it goes down into Beaverton, Oregon, and a bit down into the Oregon Willamette Valley. And we also have a considerable number here at Ridgefield, Chilapoo, Sauvie Island, Franz Lake, areas in Western Washington along the Columbia. We have some out here along the Columbia through here. And then, of course, we have the main tundra swan population here in the Skagit. And that population, which breeds outer Aleutians. In the pink, it goes up the migration back to the Aleutian. However, some of them go east and they come up through here in Moses Lake, but most of them seem to be going here and hit Kalispell Lake. And I don't know how many of you have ever been to Kalispell Lake, the one that's in Western Washington up by Usk-Kusick. But that is a major tundra swan migration route. And now it's become a major trumpeter swan route. And when I say major, it's gone from 0 to well over 300 to 500 trumpeters each spring that come into Kalispell Lake and then go north. Some of the tundra swans break off here or maybe down here, and they go off up into the more interior parts of Canada for nesting. But then they typically come back around and come into Alaska. So it's just a different migration route. And these green dots are where we have tundra swan sightings as well as trumpeter swan sightings on the east side. But it's an odd place to keep finding certain times of the year. The big spring migration at Kalispell Lake is amazing. More than 10,000 tundra swans, and at least 200 were there in 2022. When I was there in 2023, there was about 300 that I could find. I stopped counting. As you can see, this is mostly tundra swans. It's pretty amazing. And in all of that, you will find trumpeter swans. And it's a hard place to go birding because of access being all private. And we're trying to work with the landowner to get more access to the lake. They used to have a tundra swan festival, the Kalispell tribe did, but that has been put on hold because of issues with the people who actually own the lake. So if you ever get up near Usk-Kusick toward the end of March, you will see a spectacle that is really quite remarkable, and be sure to count for trumpeters. So the tundra swans, for their communication, typically stick their head and neck forward and talk. Trumpeters bob up and down very differently. You can see the different yellow on the lure. You can see that the eye is distinct from the bill, and the bill comes down in a curve and then goes about right here, 90 degrees almost straight down. So it's a curve and then straight down, curve, straight down. This is a key characteristic of tundra swans. Trumpeters are curved all the way. And trumpeters have all black bills with red lines on the mandible, but I have a photo that if we have enough time, I can show you of 3 tundra swans, and they all are really different, and they're radically different. So here again is another family of tundra swans that calls a typical behavior of tundra swans. And this is the color of a tundra swan typically in the spring. They're much paler gray, and you'll notice them if you get up to Kalispell, or you may have noticed them at some of the other lakes that you visit. And just like any other swan, there's lots of behavior going on. I just really love spending time watching swans doing whatever they're doing. But in the spring, they can get pretty aggressive because they're paired up and they're headed toward the breeding ground. So the males tend to be more aggressive, as you can see on the bottom right. So trumpeter swans are other species of swan and a largest waterfowl in the world with a wingspan of 7 to 9 feet. They weigh about 25 to 40 pounds. The big males are typically 35 pounds with big wingspans. Tundra swans are typically 15 to 20 pounds with a 6-foot wingspan. Some of them can go to 7, but they are smaller. Even when they're out on the water and they might not look seriously smaller, they really are seriously smaller. So trumpeter swans have been broken down into much more refined of their flyways based on where they're breeding and how basically it's about where they breed. So we have the interior population here from about mid-Montana and Wyoming going east. And that is the interior population. And that has been a 100% completely human restored population. It is managed differently than our birds. They do not really migrate very far. They certainly don't breed up in the Arctic. And this is the blue area that you see here. The red area, they'll go up a little bit into Alberta, but that's it. That's as far as they go. As I said, the management is very, very different because it is a completely human restored population. I did, over many decades, send a number of swans, 73 or 74 cygnets, along with a few adults, to help the restoration efforts in Iowa. So the population here is doing very, very well. And that's the one that you will hear about with this tremendous success of saving the trumpeter swan from extirpation here. But also here in the Rocky Mountain population, which the Greater Yellowstone, we call it the RMP zone in blue. That one is the tri-state population with Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. And this one has been restored, but mostly through just protecting habitat. Hasn't been any push to release birds except into a couple of areas now in the tri-state area. They're doing some restoration because they got down to such a low number. And you'll notice that Washington is divided. So Eastern Washington is the Rocky Mountain population, the RMP, and the west side of our state is the Pacific Coast population. So we have a very different scenario than any other state except Oregon, who has the same thing, Pacific Coast population, and the Rocky Mountain population. Now, Malheur Refuge, they have done some restoration for the species, and they continue to do releases there, and it's working. And you may see an occasional trumpeter wearing a collar that looks kind of odd with the code, and that would be an Eastern Washington bird. But we have not done any releases in Washington because the trumpeters are coming back all on their own. They're doing great. They're doing very well in Western Washington, in British Columbia, and up through their breeding grounds. So just know that this is how the things are divided up in our area. So Washington State trumpeter swans, again, the migration comes down from the interior breeding down here to Washington, and here it goes into Eastern Washington. So 2 breeding pairs were at Turnbull 2 years ago. I don't know what they had this last year. Your birds breed primarily in Canada, and the greater, yeah, yours mostly up in here. So here is how Washington looks, and I find this fascinating because over here on our side of the the mountains, the yellow are the wintering areas for trumpeters. You can see them all down here on the Columbia River. And on the Long Beach Peninsula, the Chehalis, primarily through Snohomish, Snoqualmie, Stillaguamish, Skagit, and up by Bellingham, but they're also out here on the outer coast, scattered around. Squim now has about 130, 140. And then, of course, we have over here, which is the RMP. And we have the Cascade Range. And it was originally thought that never the twain shall meet. So nobody thought about birds crossing over the Cascade. We always thought in the Skagit birds that were up here in the upper reaches, Ross Lake and all of that, those would be all PCP, right? Because they're on the west side. However, that got debunked a few years back. But over here on the east side, this is approximately where we see most of the trumpeter swan sightings. And we know we're expanding, and it's not universally inclusive everywhere, but we're beginning to really work on send-issue sightings of trumpeters and tundras in Eastern Washington, because the department and I both want to know. But what we also found fascinating, as you see the little red arrows here, this is Highway 20, and down here is I-90. And up here at Highway 20, about, I guess it's probably 10, 11 years ago now, maybe 12, we witnessed birds flying from the east to the west and landing at Ross Lake. And we went, whoa, and we watched them go back through the pass. And we went, okay, that blows our little minds. And so we realized that the birds up here were really RMP birds, and they're really coming through the pass. And that's when we found a bird here that had died with a collar on from over here. So we know that they're going up through here, and we know that they're going up through the Okanagan, Vesuvius Lake, and Ross Lake and Diablo. And we know that they're coming through here. And I found a dead swan in a farm field about right in here one winter, maybe up more like here. And it was a leucistic swan, and I went, oh, that's got to be from Eastern Washington. But we also know that at Cle Elum, trumpeter swans have oversummered on numerous occasions over the years. So we believe that they were coming through the pass. And then I get this photo from someone I'd never met who was driving through the pass at Hyack on a snowy day in December 3 years ago. And he found 9 trumpeter swans slogging through the snow, flying with ski lifts in the background. And that's got to be one of the oddest pictures I've ever seen in Washington with swans. Never did I expect to see swans and ski lifts in the same photo. And they were going, again, east to west. And they were also observed later that year going from the west to the east through the I-90 corridor. So we know that they're crossing over the pass there. Where they go from there, where do they spend their winter on the west side? Anyone can speculate, but I suspect that it's very close to the pass area, which would be North Bend, Snoqualmie, and up through Carnation Farms, and then potentially looking at some of the topography and where birds have been coming in Umpqua Plateau. So that's our guess. It will take some other sightings and maybe some satellite transmitter work to find out for sure. So the migration relations for the RMP and the PCP are really cool because here's Ross Lake, and over here is Osuyas Lake, and they go straight up into the Rocky Mountain population, and Ross Lake goes up, and they can divide themselves and go straight into the RMP. Again, here's how they go. Up over here on the left side graphic. Our trumpeters on the west side, they go up the yellow line. They make a division here, splitting the mountain, and this got confirmed by some satellite work this year. And they go up to Whitehorse, and it's a huge marsh lake. If you've never been, they have a late April swan festival. And the migration of waterfowl is unbelievable. It's incredible. Some of these birds here are coming up and going to Marsh Lake because they're PCP birds. And some of them are going to be RMP birds that we don't know yet. We're still jury's out. It's really interesting. So the midwinter aerial white bird survey in Oregon has shown some things. And when I say white swan, they did not differentiate, but the birds that are down here on the west side, those are going to be your trumpeters. The birds along the Columbia are going to be tundra with some trumpeters mixed in, because we now know that trumpeters really are at the Julia Hansen Butler Wildlife Refuge. And we know that these trumpeters may or may not be going up and down the corridor. They may be going back through here with the tundra swans. And here are some other tundra swans that Oregon found, France Lake and that kind of thing. So this year, the Sinolican had 67 trumpeter swans wintering on it. And that's way up there in, north central eastern Washington. I had the great pleasure of going over to the Chesaw area north of Tonasket a couple of weeks ago. I didn't see any swans, but I ended up rescuing one of the loons off of Lost Lake, which unfortunately did not survive. But in any event, Sinolican is an amazing place for swans to gather, and 67 is a high number. The previous year, we had nothing close to that. So again, Eastern Washington is becoming more and more a place where trumpeter swans are coming through, and coming through in the middle of the state more than the eastern side. They're coming through, I think, through here, coming out of the Okanagan and out of Alberta. So the natural wetlands are one of the big driving forces for swans, especially over in eastern Washington. You have a lot. They tip up to feed, they bend over to feed. And on the bottom photo, if you see a bunch of swans like this, do not call me. They are not dead, they're feeding. It is amazing how many people call me and tell me about dead swans floating on the water. And I get there and they were just feeding. Well, they didn't have a neck. So spend a few minutes and make sure that they're going to come up for air after about three minutes. Agriculture is key to our healthy waterfowl populations, especially swans and geese, especially in the Skagit Valley, but also you'll see very soon about what happens on the east side with snow geese. So dairy farms are key. From the post-harvest corn, they eat a lot of it. They eat the pasture grass, but again, post-harvest corn through here too. But this is pasture grass, which has very high protein content due to the way dairy farmers manage their land. So without dairy, so 85% of the swans in Western Washington are dairy dependent. I don't know what the percentage is in Eastern Washington, but over the last decade, it has increased rapidly to a substantial amount are dairy dependent. Potatoes, another big one for Western Washington, especially in the Skagit. They find the potatoes, they dig the potatoes, they are muddy swans. Whoever said swans were white and gorgeous. No, I can tell you that half of them are muddy and slurpy. It's great to watch them feeding in the potato fields. So over here, they did a research project last winter and they banded 19 swans with satellite collars. They weigh very little. They're plastic and they have a solar panel, 2 solar panels on them. And what we have learned from just the birds here has been phenomenal. We're hoping, or the Department of Fish and Wildlife is hoping, to start a project over in Eastern Washington through the Washington State University. So I'll know more in the next few weeks about what may or may not be possible in the coming next few years about really looking at not only trumpeter swans, but tundra swans as well and better understanding. So this is the satellite transmitter that I ended up sort of following the bird because while it was banded up here in Mount Vernon, she almost immediately went down here near where I live. And she stayed there for the whole winter. And then in one big leap, she went and spent time up here in the Skagit for 1 hour. And then she went over here and spent time for an hour and another hour. And then she went straight to the Gulf Islands. So all of that in less than a day, she managed to fly. And now she's way up in Alaska out of cell tower range. So these collars are dependent on pinging off of cell towers. So if you're out of cell tower range, well, then we don't have any data. But once they come back into cell tower range, we will be able to download that data and we'll know where they actually were the whole time. So we'll see what happens. So what do we know about swans in Eastern Washington, trumpeter or tundra? Band reports from the U.S. Banding Lab. So if you see a band swan, whether a trumpeter or a tundra or a snow goose, please report it to the U.S. Banding Lab. That's the place you really want to put it. Sightings reported to WDFW and Northwest Swans or others to collect sightings. You can report them to me. I will turn, if it's a band, I will turn it into the Banding Lab. But we are collecting swan sightings, whatever they are, wherever they are, and no sighting is turned away. eBird, you can post to eBird if you want, but we don't have a way of really gleaning that data in a way that's more meaningful to us. And when I say us, it's WDFW as well. So it's a recent and effective tool for documenting trust sightings and tundra sightings, but it doesn't give us enough information and we don't have time to mine eBird, if you will. So sending them to us would be great. There's no comprehensive swan surveys in Eastern Washington for trumpeter or tundra. We are hoping that that will change, maybe not this winter, but certainly the next winter, spring, we're hoping. And Spokane Audubon can be a part of that because we really need to have more people all over Eastern Washington because you've got them all over the place, along with snow geese. So the movements of migration and wintering, RMP using highway passes. from east to west and back again. That's a big one, and we're looking to see how much more of that happens. Trumpeter showing up at Kalispell Lake. Nobody really observed in a meaningful way in 2023 or this year. So again, the banding goes to the bird banding lab, and you can look it up online. Just type in US bird banding lab, and it will take you right to the place where you can enter all your data there, and you will get a report back on the band that you saw, like who banded it, when it was banded, and then you can contact that person and see where the bird's been, or if anyone else has sighted it. So now I'm going to change over to the snow goose side of life, and here's a picture of snow geese in migration coming out of Alaska. And coming into our area. Now, admittedly, you didn't have many snow geese over there, say 12 years ago. You had maybe 250, 400, maybe. And then things began to shift. And we'll talk about that shift. Snow geese, again, the kind that we see this kind of flock, but now you see this over, especially in the Othello area, that's central eastern Washington area. And of course, this is something to be concerned about. If you're near one of these great flocks of geese and they decide to take off, I hope you're wearing a hat or have an umbrella, because they do offload very quickly, and many of them will do the same thing. And it can be hazardous to your clothing, hair, and other things. So we have two lesser snow geese, which is what we have here. Two color morphs. We have the white with the black wingtips, and we have the blue phase, which is a blue with black wingtips and a white head. Otherwise, they have the same color bill, same color feet. And you have both on your side, and we have both on this side now. We didn't used to have that. They were mostly mid-continent color morph, but suddenly we seem to be having more and more of them. So they have a big grinning patch with a pink bill. The juveniles are gray with a black grinning patch and kind of a mottly pink bill, but they do have these orange feet. The blue phase juvenile, which is in the lower right corner, is this dark blue all over, and right above it is a juvenile white phase. So you can tell the difference pretty easily. When I was over at the Sandhill Crane Festival this last spring, I saw probably 10, 12 blue phase in the flock of white snow geese that I was looking at. And I was surprised to see that many, but you probably have more of them than we do. So here is a map of goose migration with satellite transmitter work. And up here in the upper left area is what we call Wrangel Island. And that's in Russia. And then Alaska. And the purple is here is the mid-continent Western Arctic population of snow geese. And then we have Thule white fronts in yellow, greater white fronts in red, and Ross geese, which are barely in our state at all in the west side, and rare on the, on the east side, and rare on the west side. They really don't come here. They don't really winter here. We get an occasional one, but they're not common. So here is snow goose 101 for the whole North American continent. The greater snow goose is on the East Coast. The lesser snow goose is on the West Coast, and the Western Arctic population and the mid-continent population. And then you have the greater snow geese, and the greater snow geese only winter along the coastal, basically the coastal states of the Atlantic. Our population, we are only the Wrangel Island snow goose population. a little bit of the Western Arctic, which is now merging in with the Wrangel Island up here, where there's crossover. And then we have the mid-continent. And this is kind of an important thing to know if any of you know hunters. The dividing line comes right down here in the Pacific Flyway versus the Central Flyway. And the management of the mid-continent population is completely different than the Pacific Coast population in terms of hunting. Because the problem with the mid-continent population is very definitely a lot of food on the wintering grounds, and they go back up to the breeding grounds and have decimated the breeding grounds for all species. In our side of the country, we have basically unlimited breeding areas on Wrangel Island, and a little bit in the Western Arctic is true, they can expand. And we have a limited winter food supply. So that's a big distinction to understand when it comes to the basic management of our snow geese. Here's a satellite view. Wrangel Island is way up here in the Chukchi Sea of Siberia off the Siberian coast. And here are the main wintering areas for snow geese from Wrangel Island. Central Valley of California, which gets the bulk of them, Sauvie Island, Chillipu, Boardman, Oregon, that's you guys over there, and the Fraser Skagit. And here's how they kind of go to the Fraser Skagit, and they go through Alberta and then come back over. So they don't go straight down, which would seem logical, but they don't do that. They go way over here to Alberta, and then they come in. And that seems to be true for some of the swans as well, and some other goose species as well. So what is the status of our snow goose population right now in Washington? Well, it has shifted dramatically over the last 3 years. So in 2018, we only had about 109,000 in Skagit Valley and hardly any in the east side. And then we started getting more on the east side and more and more. And now last year in the winter count, 185,000. So you went from 500 to 185,000 in about 5 years. And you've got about, because about 20,000 were there, and now you have 185,000. And that's a jump from the previous year of only 150,000. So you grew 35,000 snow geese in 1 year. But notice what happened to the Skagit Fraser population. It went down by about 40,000. So our birds are going over to your side. And that is a direct effect of agricultural practices and environmental law. When the dairy farms were vilified in the Skagit a number of years back, a lot of them migrated to Eastern Washington. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the other thing that happened in the 2023 fall migration off Wrangel Island, there were about 1.6 million snow geese. Going in the spring migration in 2023, it was about half that. So they had this huge population increase. But now what we're seeing is this year, the rumors are different in that Wrangel Island did not have a good breeding year, but that, and neither did the Western Arctic, but certainly Wrangel Island did not have a good breeding year. So we're not expecting any big changes with snow goose numbers. In fact, they may decrease, but we don't know because we can't talk to the Russian scientists. So our habitat trends are farming, wetlands, and waterfowl, and the loss of waterfowl-friendly farming certainly is impacting the west side. The east side, you're growing in some areas, and not so much in others. And it's still something that I'm still working to learn more about. So in terms of loss of waterfowl-friendly farming on the west side, market forces, both local and global, increased regulations, environmental regulations of all kinds are definitely affecting, and the tribal rules, a shift in crops farmed, berries, nuts, and trees from dairy farms and other waterfowl-friendly crops. Salmon habitat restoration, competing conflict for waterfowl habitat is huge one in the state of Washington. And crop shifting, especially in the Skagit, to deter losses from snow geese is another major one because snow geese are just eating everybody out of house and home, or they were. And there was a fear that we were going to end up with like 180, 190,000 snow geese between us and the Fraser Delta. And the answer is it didn't happen. The snow goose population for wintering has decreased, but over on your side, it's really gone up. And we expect it to continue to go up. So here's why. What happened in Eastern Washington? Why the shift of snow geese? Well, here's Boardman, Oregon down here on the bottom of the screen and the red dot. And in Boardman, Oregon, you have what became one of the first 70,000 cow, what they call CAFO, it's a mega dairy. And you have an area which is also got a private lake here, another private lake in here. You have lots and lots of habitat through here that's all private. And the dairy farm and a cattle feeding operation for beef cows. Here's Kennewick, here's Columbia National Wildlife Refuge. And then we go to a little bit closer view. You see Cold Springs and this other lake that's here. And you've got the dairy and you've got the big cattle feeding operation, and all these crop circles are waterfowl friendly farming. Alfalfa, corn, whatever, it's all waterfowl friendly farming. And the snow geese moved up from Summer Lake, where there was 250,000 of them every winter, and they moved up here to Boardman, Oregon. And then the farming began to expand, as you can see up here at Richland and that type of thing. And now here's what happened. So now here's Richland, here's Boardman down here, Richland here. You can see all this expansion up here toward Yakima. You can see all this expansion happening through all of this, and the Columbia National Wildlife Refuge is all in there too. And here are, you know, dairy farms are coming in. So here's this little inset here, and this is the blue is all dairy farms, and they're all in here. So you've had this high increase of dairy farms, and what do swans and geese love? Dairy farms, because they grow the right food. So the geese have moved and shifted their whole flyway. The whole pattern of use has shifted due to dairy farms coming over. Originally probably began with the original salmon regulations and pushing dairy farms out, and people deciding to go to the east side. It was cheaper to have dairy farms over there, easier because you didn't have so much water and you didn't have as much salmon issues at the time. And so that's why it's kind of interesting. So snow goose hunting, they've now got an extended management area in management area 1 for snow goose is now 10 for the daily limit, plus 12 hunt days in February, so that we can continue to keep geese moving off of individual farms throughout the more into the winter season, and a 1 day for youth, veterans, and active. And during that 12 days, the extra hunt, the bag limit is 20. In Eastern Washington, you also have a regular season. 10 is the limit, and it increases to 20 a day for the entire season in the Columbia Basin area. Again, to reduce the amount of crop damage that the geese are doing to the farmers. We want to keep the geese moving. And for those of you who are hunters and you've heard about the conservation order that is in place in the mid-continent population and the Central Flyway, where at the end of the season, they have a special hunt through what they call the conservation order, the CO. Keep in mind, it only applies to the Central Flyway. And what that means is you can unplug your shotgun, because currently you have to keep a plug in it, so it only holds 3 shells. You unplug your shotgun so it can hold whatever your shotgun will hold, 5, 6 shells. And you can shoot as many geese as you want in that particular period. And they hope you shoot a lot. We do not have that, and that's to reduce the population so that we can protect the breeding grounds to the north. But we do not have a conservation order, nor will the Pacific Flyway have one anytime that I'm aware of into the distant future. We have a very different structure of our flyway rules and regulations, and there are pieces of it in place that cannot be changed without going through environmental impact statement, many other steps. And even then, I don't know that anyone would want to do that. Some hunters do, but we don't want to start that process. It's just too onerous, and it doesn't really serve a lot of other issues that come up with that. So flock watchers are out there, especially in this Skagit Valley, but I've also noticed that at the Sandhill Crane Festival, the snow geese certainly bring in spectacles and large numbers of people, especially there at the Potholes Reservoir, where you get easily more geese in one place than we have in the Skagit the whole winter. It's really spectacular. Sometimes you go to the geese, you know, and sometimes the geese come to you because they're all over the road in the Skagit, and sometimes late in the season, right before they migrate. So we've put together Birding with Awareness, creating connections between user groups and waterfowl habitats. And I won't go into this a whole lot. I'm working on a major presentation about birding with awareness, but it's getting out to go bird watching and take photographs during the winter waterfowl season. Very popular, large flocks of snow geese and swans. It's a huge ecotourism industry now on the east side as well as the west side. It just means to be more aware of what you are looking at. Seeing in context what you're actually looking at. Public lands being a focus. And public wildlife areas are shared spaces between bird watchers, hunters, photographers, dog trainers, and dog walkers and other people, especially on the east side for some of the shooting activities. Don't get me started on that. So private lands and public roads, helping people to be aware that those are they're private lands. They're not public lands just because they've got acres and acres of land. It doesn't mean that that's public land. It means it's a private farm. You probably are more aware of that on the east side. On the west side, we have a serious problem, especially in the Skagit. And then I look at it like the table. It supports the spectacle of waterfowl. All 4 legs are needed for balance and support. You need wildlife, waterfowl, snow geese, and swans, raptors, shorebirds, and other species. You need hunters to support the farms, keep crop damage less. Waterfowl conservation is a big one with Ducks Unlimited and that type of thing. And the conservationists are very important. They help conserve, protect farmland, waterfowl conservation, wetlands, and more. That's where Spokane Audubon comes in. There's agriculture. Needed are wildlife-friendly crops, dairy farms, and economic viability for farmers. And the last leg is ecotourism, bird watchers and other visitors of all kinds. And that creates the sustainability for that tabletop for the ecosystem economically and environmentally. So this is a poster I made up, and I'm trying to make a presentation that speaks more to that. And it was in part done with Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Washington State Dairy Federation, Pilchuck Audubon, Eastside Audubon, and Northwest Swans. So pretty impressive undertaking to help. In the Skagit Valley, they have Be Birdwise. And tomorrow night, I'm giving a talk with Be Birdwise up in the Skagit about farming and waterfowl and the economy and bird watchers and behavior of bird watchers and that kind of thing. And they have a code of conduct. It's a very Skagit specific group called Be Birdwise, but we're taking it out and calling it Birding with Awareness, and wanting to get more people to be aware that when they go out birding, it's more than just looking at the bird, more than posting it to eBird. Look and see what's really happening in your community. What is the habitat we're using? And how can we keep that agricultural connection? Because without it, we aren't going to have these huge flocks of swans or geese or ducks in our lives. And just very quickly, lead poisoning still a problem. Lead pellets from hunting, old hunting, or shotguns for trap shooting and that type of thing. Fishing sinkers is a big bad one on your side, especially for loons. And then I wanted to just share with you some really cool photographs, because not all of these were the west side. This was the east side. This was the east side. Bentneck swans. Please keep your eyes out. And if you have your camera handy, we would love to see more pictures of your bentneck swans. And they are a true deformation in the egg. The bones are deformed. I've seen a couple of skeletons of these birds. You know, they've got either this curve or a bigger curve, or they've got this kind of curve. So they can even have two curves, two bends. I want to bring attention to the bottom one, because the one on the left was taken this last winter with this particular bird. And this was a picture of that same bird taken the year before as a juvenile. Look at how it flew down from Alaska in that configuration. We think that this bird and this bird are the same because we've seen many other pictures of it this last winter. And I have another picture of it the winter before. And it appears to be the same bird, who now can move its neck a little bit more, but it has a definite crook right here where it has a crook right here, even though it can extend its neck a little more. So it's really interesting for bent neck syndrome. Why it occurs, we have no idea. If any of you out there have an idea, please share, because we have no idea. But they are, and tundra swans can have it as well, but we see it mostly in trumpeters. So again, take those photos. They're out there. This one was taken somewhere in central Washington last year. And then the other one that you can keep your eyes out for, even on the east side, is this is what I saw last winter, and I'm going to be writing a paper about it. They were in the Stillaguamish Valley, and they were in a generally similar area that most of the birders don't go to for whatever reason. It's hard to bird there. But during one of our surveys, we came across this bird here, and it has yellow legs, and it's clearly a trumpeter swan. Clearly, it's all white. And that means it's likely an adult, and it's a leucistic, hatched white, no gray phase. They have different colored legs. They can have red legs, yellow, school bus yellow, pale yellow, pink legs in the trumpeter swan. I've seen a couple in my life before, but this one was kind of interesting with the pale yellow legs. This one is definitely a first, probably in North America. This is a tundra swan. It has yellow legs, which tundra swans do not even in their juvenile, they don't have yellow legs unless they're really, 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 really young. And then they turn mostly black by the time I saw this bird. The bill is really interesting. It's clearly a juvenile bill because it's pink with a lot of what will become yellow on the lore, meaning I believe that it's a Buick form of the tundra swan. And it's all white, meaning it's a juvenile tundra swan and it's all white. And what fascinated me most about these birds is the white looks like somebody poured bleach on these birds. They are really, really white. They are not albino. They are leucistic. This is a first for North America that I've been able to find. No one else I know has ever seen one. And interestingly enough, 2 of us saw the bird over a period of about 6 weeks. And no one else reported it anywhere. But we know where it was. And then it moved up to the Skagit for about 2 weeks. But what I'm thinking is, if you're laying down and you're a swan, nobody's looking at your legs. And if you just looked at this bird, you would think, oh, an adult swan. It's white and black bill, and you would just move on. So I don't know if we'll see these birds again, but all I can say is when you're out birding and looking at swans, look for non-black legs. And if you see these non-black legs, take note. They're leucistic, and these are odd occurrences. And if it's a tundra swan, that's even rare. And they're really rare, the tundra swans in Europe. Oh dear. So if I think I can make this work. I'm not sure if this will work. So that's how trumpeter swans talk to each other. They waggle their wings as bob up and down. And this is another interesting photo for Swan ID people. So if you look at these 3 swans, you'll notice they all have red lines on their mandible. And one has a honking big yellow splotch. And this was an accidental photo from a friend of mine. She was taking pictures, and then when she got home, she went, oh my gosh. And she realized this one had a lot of yellow. And again, for Swan ID, you look at the line down here. This is a curved line all the way. This is a curved line all the way. The eye not distinct from the bill, really. Much more straight profile line on the top of the bill. And then you look at this guy up here, and his eye is a little more distinct, but his line goes here, and then it drops straight down, and he has a bit of a curve in the bill. And that yellow, this is a tundra swan. Is he a big honking male trumpeter tundra swan? Yes, huge. But it's a tundra swan. So you never know what you're going to see when you're out birding and taking photos. So if you ever, look at this and go, oh, 3, what's that? And yes, it has red on the mandible. And typically what I find with tundra swans is they tend to have almost more red in some of the birds than the trumpeters themselves. So that's just an interesting photo I thought I'd share. And here's the snow geese taking off flight in the evening. Swans at sunset. And now questions. This is one of the cygnets I raised in my backyard and it went to Iowa. So that's the end of my talk. Any questions?
Curious about avian flu. How about avian flu?
Oh, avian flu, good question. Not this past year, but the previous year. Fall, so it would be 2023, 2022. There was a bit of an outbreak with AI in our trumpeter swans in Western Washington. It wasn't big, but probably about 35 birds died. And what was interesting about the AI is that summer in 2022, there was a swan on Whidbey Island that had been living, a trumpeter, that had been living there for 3 years. It came in as a juvenile and it never left. It just flew around on southern Whidbey Island and lived in a couple of wetlands and it was doing great. And it was suddenly found dead in August of 2022. And I got the bird and sent it in for a necropsy and it tested positive for AI. Everybody was shocked because up to that point, no trumpeters in the country had tested positive for AI. That fall, we did see AI in our wild swans in Western Washington. Unknown what might have happened in the rest of the population, but certainly in the Alaska population, there was a minimal amount of mortality. And when I say that, compared to lead poisoning, it was nothing. But they died mostly around my area. I mean, like 15 of the birds were picked up off of one lake over a period of a week. And so it was very localized. And then this last year, we have had very few, no die-off. But we did have in 2022 a bigger die-off of snow geese in the Skagit Valley. That did not happen over where you are, but it happened in the Skagit. And why it occurred more in the Skagit, Fraser area, we don't know. It could be how they came down, what happened on the east side. There was some, but not much. And then this last fall, 2023, the mortality from AI switched over to Caspian, to Cackler Canada geese and Caspian terns. So, and hardly any snow geese died from AI. So why is this? We don't know. So does that help answer some of your questions? Although it raises many more, we just don't know what AI does.
Martha?
Thanks, Martha. We have time for one more question. Kim?
Hi, Martha. Thanks. Kim Thorburn. Good to see you. I'm curious about breeding pressure or population pressure in Wrangel Island. Is there not, I recognize that 2024, as you presented, was an unusual weather year. But it was my understanding that broods have grown pretty large, and they suspect that's climate change. And there has been population pressure on Wrangel Island breeding as well as the Northern Canada breeding area.
Well, until this year. And Wrangel had a very bad year for breeding because of the weather. So we don't know how many birds are going to come off Wrangel. We won't know until they, get here. But it was a poor year for breeding because it had a very late snowmelt. So we think the population just sort of is self-correcting. The Western Arctic population had an okay year. It wasn't anything. Everybody thought that this growth would keep going and would be exponential, and it isn't. It came to a grinding halt this year. So Mother Nature has taken a course that can happen. So we're going to have to see what we see, but certainly all of our birds come from Wrangell, and how many are coming off of Wrangell, I don't know. But it was a bad year for breeding, a very poor year. So hopefully we won't see this exponential growth, but we are concerned about that. That's true.
Thank you very much, Martha. Really appreciate it.
And if anybody has any questions they want to ask, they can email me. I'm happy to answer any questions or whatever, because I know that we really want to know more about Eastern Washington. I'm certainly curious. I have a great love for that area, and it's just pulling it all together. But the swans are telling us that they're all over Eastern Washington now. Trumpeters are everywhere in migration and wintering in places that we hadn't necessarily thought they would or would not. But certainly in migration, the birds are coming through. The big question for all of us is, in the Kalispell, when you have 300, 400 trumpeter swans, where are they coming from in migration? Kyle would like to know, and so would I. We cannot think where they can store themselves for the winter. Where are they coming from? There isn't enough in the Rocky Mountain population east of all of us. In other words, the greater Yellowstone and the GYC. That's not those birds. They're coming from somewhere. And the question is, are they hiding in the large tundra flocks that nobody looks at? Where would that be? And, where are they coming from? Because we don't know. We simply just do not know. So that's a big question. So again, it's a work in progress, but that's why we would like to have more surveys over there about where the flocks are coming. Are they just trumpeters, or are they tundra trumpeter? Because if they're coming through with the big flocks of tundra, that could be coming out of Northern California, which again, how many people are looking at those really big flocks of tundras? Not that many people. So
Martha,
don't know. And I know
I'm sorry to interrupt, Martha, but we have a time crunch here. We need to be out of this room fairly quickly. So
Okay.
I think, speaking for all of us, we appreciate your presentation. Lots and lots of information. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.